"You are done here, Senna." Alistair Merritt, 44-year-old husband of Senna Caldwell Merritt and chief executive of Merritt Elevation Group, said it in the front hallway of Aldenmore House on a Thursday evening, while his mother watched from the top of the grand staircase, with the patience of a woman who had been rehearsing those words for years. In his right hand was a sealed courier envelope. Beside him stood Helene Merritt, 68-year-old mother of Alistair and the controlling trustee of the Merritt Family Residential Trust, holding Senna's house keys the way someone holds a thing they have just won. Roxanne Dole, 31-year-old brand strategist for Merritt Elevation Group, leaned against the sitting room doorframe in a cream dress, a silk scarf wrapped loosely at her throat. Senna's scarf, from the hall closet, the one Senna had left there 3 winters ago without thinking twice. Roxanne said nothing at all. That was worse than any insult she could have chosen. Senna Caldwell Merritt, 37, stood in the hallway she had maintained for 11 years with one bag beside her and the quiet of a woman who had already heard the sound this kind of silence makes before it speaks. She looked at her husband. She waited for him to correct the moment. He did not. "The settlement will be delivered tomorrow morning," he said. "Don't fight this. You have nothing to fight with." Senna looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at his mother, at the keys, at the scarf around Roxanne's throat, and understood that they had not just ended a marriage tonight. They believed they had ended her. They did not know about Harwick Capital and Trust. They did not know about the Caldwell Beacon Trust, the private family trust created by her late father before Senna ever met Alistair Merritt, the trust that held majority ownership of Harwick and used her maiden name on every board record and filing. They did not know that when Alistair's company submitted emergency construction loans, commercial credit renewals, and a pending refi package to Harwick Capital, he was borrowing from the institution his wife quietly controlled. He had never asked. He had never been curious. And because he had never been curious, he had signed 11 years' worth of paperwork without reading past the first page. He did not know the quiet woman he had just thrown out of her own home was the reason his company still had a credit line to lose. She was the daughter of Barlow Caldwell, the founder of Harwick Capital and Trust, and the man people in certain circles still spoke about in the careful way reserved for those whose influence outlasted them. When Barlow died, the bank did not pass to outside investors the way most people assume. It passed through Caldwell Beacon Trust to Senna, along with a list of instructions her father had written in his neat, unrushed handwriting, and one lesson he had taught her inside the bank itself the summer she turned 22. He had taken her into the executive boardroom after hours, turned on the low lights, and placed a pen in her hand. "A signature is consent," he told her. "It is a door that once opened cannot be unwalked through. Guard it accordingly." At the time, she had thought he was being dramatic. He was her father. Fathers of his generation often spoke in the language of permanence. She understood it now. When she married Alistair, she disclosed the trust in the premarital agreement the way her father's attorneys had structured it. Caldwell Beacon Trust, listed by name, purpose described as family financial interests and associated holdings. Alistair laughed at the paperwork, called it old money housekeeping, and signed without reading the second page. He had been proud of not reading it. He told the story at dinner parties once, early in the marriage, as a joke about her family's formality. By the time the marriage ended, no one was laughing. Inside Merritt Elevation Group, the cracks had been visible for 3 years to anyone paying attention. Senna had been paying attention since year 1. She knew the names of every junior accountant on the payroll floor. She knew which vendors had stopped answering emails and which ones had moved to cash-only invoicing after too many delayed payments. She knew that the payroll system had flagged a shortfall twice in the past 14 months, and that both times Alice Pater had announced to staff that leadership had stabilized the accounts, while Senna moved money through a private family relief mechanism so quietly that no one ever traced it back to her. She had caught 3 errors in loan renewal documents before they were submitted to Harwick. She had calmed 4 vendors on the edge of litigation with phone calls Alistair never knew were made. She had reviewed construction project, cost overruns, and rewritten budget summaries that would have alarmed investors if submitted as his finance team had prepared them. He called her a supportive partner. He said it at Gallus while she stood 2 steps behind him, arranging the room so it looked like everything was working. Tilly Rask, 24-year-old junior accountant at Merritt Elevation, had red eyes one morning when Senna arrived at the office to deliver a corrected materials invoice. Tilly closed the payroll screen too quickly when Senna passed. Senna stopped beside the desk and said quietly, "Did everyone get paid last Thursday?" Tilly opened her mouth, then closed it. That was answer enough. Senna placed a folder on the desk. Run the hardship review through HR, not payroll. Flag it as employee relief documentation, not a correction. The process already exists. She paused. It's quiet. That's intentional. Tilly blinked. Mr. Merritt said the accounts were stable. Then the accounts can remain stable, Senna said, while the people who do the work keep their lights on. She walked away before Tilly could respond. That was how she had survived 11 years in the Merritt house. She fixed the problems quietly, and she let Alistair stand in front of the cameras and call himself a builder of things. She had nearly told him the truth once, in the 3rd year of their marriage, during a dinner with another developer who had married a woman with inherited banking interests. After the couple left, Alistair poured himself another drink and said, "Women who inherit money always want to be called powerful. It embarrasses the people who actually earned it." Senna had been holding her wine glass, ready to tell him about Harik. She set it down instead. She had believed then that his discomfort with the idea of her owning something was temporary, a performance of pride that would soften with time. She understood now that it had never been performance. It had been his true shape, and she had spent 11 years learning the outline of it without naming what she saw. On the night they threw her out, Orson Gibbs, 64-year-old estate manager of Aldenmore House, and one of the few people who had watched Senna hold the Merritt family together, without once asking for acknowledgement, brought her bag to the door and pressed a folded note into her hand as he set it down. She read the note later in the car. It read, "East Records Room, 2nd cabinet. I have copies. Say the word." Maud Sellers, 58-year-old head housekeeper of Aldenmore House, stood near the bottom of the stairs when Helene ordered staff to clear Senna's personal items from the master bedroom. Maud did not move. "Mrs. Merritt can collect her own belongings," Maud said, in the same tone she used to inform guests that dinner was served, calm, total, impossible to argue with. Helene's face did something quiet and dangerous. "Excuse me." "She can collect her own belongings," Maud repeated. "She has given this house more care than this evening is giving her." No one spoke. Then Senna touched Maud's arm gently. "It's all right." But it was not all right, and everyone in that hallway knew it. She packed one bag, her father's pen, a copy of the Caldwell Beacon Trust summary, a small notebook she had kept for 11 years, names, dates, payment records, vendor conversations, every gap she had quiet filled with her own resources and her own time. A photograph of her father standing outside Harik Capital the day it opened. She left the wedding photo on the dresser, face down. At the door, Roxanne descended the staircase slowly, one hand trailing the banister. "I want you to know," she said, "that I will take very good care of this house." Senna looked at her, then at the walls of Aldenmore, the water-stained ceiling in the east wing that Senna had paid to replaster, the window seals she had replaced the winter before last, the garden maintained only because Senna had renegotiated the vendor contracts when Alistair let the accounts fall 60 days behind. "It's a beautiful house," Senna said. "It requires a great deal of invisible work." Roxanne's smile did not quite recover. Alistair stepped forward, not looking at Senna, looking at the door. "Sign the papers when they arrive. Don't make this difficult." Senna looked at him for one long moment. "I never made anything difficult for you, Alistair," she said. "That was the problem." Then she walked out into the cold, and Aldenmore glowed behind her, like a house proud of everything it had taken. The divorce papers arrived at her hotel room before her coat had dried. Win Farber, 47-year-old divorce attorney and litigation strategist, and the woman Barlow Caldwell had once told his daughter to call if love ever became law, arrived within the hour. She did not ask how Senna was. She read the settlement twice, then placed her finger on a single line near the end. "Wife acknowledges that she holds no direct or indirect interest in any lending institution connected to husband's current or prior business obligations and waives all right to request, review, or challenge records relating to such obligations." "This is not a divorce agreement," Wynne said. "This is a blueprint for something they're afraid you might find." Senna looked at her father's pen on the desk. "They want me out of the room before I understand what room I'm standing in." "Then we make sure," Wynne said, "that you walk back through the right door." Before she could say more, Senna opened her secure tablet. The screen showed the Harik Capital trustee dashboard, a system she had kept carefully separate from anything touching Alistair's accounts, insisting that any file related to Merritt Elevation be handled by independent officers, outside counsel, and review committees without her vote. She had drawn that wall herself, not to protect Alistair, but to protect the bank. If Harik ever had to act against him, the record had to be clean. Now the dashboard showed a flagged alert: Merit Elevation Group, Commercial Exposure Review, Elevated Risk Status, Conflict Screen Recommended. Wynne looked at the screen. Then she looked at Senna. "Does Alistair know?" she asked carefully. "He knows my father founded Harwick," Senna said. "He believes the controlling interest was sold to outside investors after my father died." "Was it?" "No." Senna closed the tablet. "It was protected from people who wouldn't bother to ask." Within the hour, Wynne issued a notice to preserve records: company communications, estate trust correspondence, loan applications, marital financial statements, any messages involving Roxanne Dole, any documentation connected to Senna's removal from Aldenmore. Every line was a door that, once locked, became evidence of what someone had tried to hide behind it. Claret Penn, 43-year-old Chief Compliance Officer of Harwick Capital, and one of 3 executives who knew Senna controlled the bank through Caldwell Beacon Trust, called the next morning. "Chairwoman Caldwell," she said, using the name the board always used, the maiden name, the one that had no connection to Merit in any public record. "The Merit Elevation file has crossed into mandatory review territory. We're not asking you to vote. We're asking for authorization to convene a conflict-screened committee and bring in outside counsel." "Convene it," Senna said. "Document every step. I will not touch the credit decision, but I will be present to confirm the conflict disclosure on the record." Inside Aldenmore's East Records room, Orson moved along the shelves with a flashlight and his phone, while Maud kept watch in the corridor. They both understood that what they were doing was not technically their business. They did it anyway. Orson went to the second cabinet and opened it. Inside were estate ledgers, maintenance records, insurance files, and vendor correspondence going back 9 years. He photographed everything. Maud found more in the third cabinet, a folder labeled RD Brand Development, Hospitality Account. Inside were receipts for an apartment lease, interior styling sessions, private travel reservations, jewelry, and wardrobe invoices. Several had been coded under client hospitality or brand environment. Then Maud found a handwritten note clipped to a loan renewal packet. Helene Merritt's handwriting, small and precise. "Do not surface the guarantee document until after the settlement is signed." Maud covered her mouth. "Orson," she said quietly. He crossed the room and read it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Orson sent everything to the address Senna had given him before she left. In her hotel room, Senna opened the files. The payroll records appeared first. She saw her own handwriting in the margins, every gap she had covered, every name she had protected, every date she had quietly moved money, so that people who had nothing to do with Alistair's decisions would not suffer for them. Then Claret sent a message. "Chairwoman, we have found something more serious than covenant breach. A spousal guarantee renewal in the Merit Elevation file includes your name on the signature line. The signature does not match your verified signature on record. We are escalating." Senna read it twice. She called Claret back. "I never signed a guarantee." "No," Claret said, "that is the problem." Senna looked at her father's pen. Someone had written her name on a document she had never seen, in a place where her name could become liability, and they had done it while planning to make her sign away the right to ask questions about it. She remembered what her father had said. A signature is a door. They had tried to open one with a copy of her key. The mediation meeting happened 4 days later. Alistair arrived with Gage Norrell, 52-year-old family attorney and Helene's legal representative, and Osmond Pruitt, 49-year-old chief financial officer of Merit Elevation. Helene arrived in a grey suit, unhurried. Roxanne came last, uninvited, wearing the same silk scarf. Hollis Brandt, 61-year-old family mediator assigned to the proceedings, looked at Roxanne with tired patience and asked whether she was a named party. "She's here for support," Alistair said. Wynne looked at Senna. Senna gave the smallest nod. "No objection. Let her stay." Alistair leaned back. "This can be simple, Senna. You take the settlement, you move on. Nobody looks bad." "Nobody looks bad," Senna repeated slowly, as if considering the phrase from every angle. Wynne tapped her pen once. "Mr. Merritt, did your wife ever contribute personal or private funds to support estate operations, staff payroll, or vendor obligations connected to Merit Elevation Group?" Alistair laughed once. "No, she had a decorating budget and a driver." Wynne wrote it down. "Mrs. Helene Merritt, same question. To your knowledge, did Senna ever use personal resources to cover shortfalls in estate accounts or company cash flow?" Helene's expression was flat. Senna's contribution to this family was social, nothing more. Wynne wrote that down too. Then she looked at Roxanne. "Mrs. Dole, were any company-funded accounts used for your personal benefit?" Housing, clothing, travel, styling, or gifts of any kind. Roxanne's chin lifted. Absolutely not. Everything was legitimate business expense. Wynne wrote it slowly. Senna watched the pen move across the page. Every denial was a record. Every lie was now attached to a date and a witness, and a room full of people who would remember exactly how it was delivered. Gage leaned forward. This line of questioning is irrelevant to marital asset division. Then it shouldn't concern you, Wynne said pleasantly. Alistair's voice hardened. You're trying to drag my company into a divorce proceeding. Your settlement did that, Wynne said, when it asked my client to waive her connection to your lenders. The room changed after that. Senna said nothing. She held her father's pen in both hands and let the silence do what her voice did not need to. 3 days later, Alistair Merritt walked into Harwick Capital's executive boardroom expecting to negotiate an extension on the pending refinancing. Osmond was beside him. Gage carried a folder. Helene arrived a moment later. Roxanne came as if she had been invited. They sat. The door opened again. Senna walked in. Every Harwick executive stood. Claret Penn said clearly and for the record, "Good morning, Chairwoman Caldwell." The colour left Alistair's face before any other part of him reacted. Helene went still in the way of someone who has just felt the ground move beneath a house they believed was permanent. Roxanne's hand dropped from Alistair's sleeve. Osmond closed his eyes for 1 second, the way a man does when something inevitable has finally arrived. Gage's folder slid off his knee. Senna walked to the head of the table and sat down. Claret spoke for the record. Chairwoman Senna Caldwell is the majority beneficiary of Caldwell Beacon Trust and the controlling owner of Harwick Capital and Trust. Given that submitted borrower documents include a document bearing her name, her presence is required for identity confirmation and conflict disclosure. The credit decision will be led by the Independent Review Committee and outside counsel. Vance Orr, 57-year-old outside banking counsel retained by Harwick for the review, opened the first binder. This is a borrower risk proceeding. Alistair stared at Senna across the table. She kept her eyes on the files. For 11 years he had looked past her in boardrooms and dining halls and the long corridors of a house she had quietly held together. He had mistaken her calm for emptiness. He had mistaken her patience for absence. That same patience now sat at the head of his bank. Claret began. Merit Elevation Group is in covenant breach on 2 active credit facilities. Emergency renewal requests were submitted 3 times in 18 months with incomplete collateral documentation. The collateral schedule lists estate property at values that do not align with current independent appraisals. Additionally, a spousal guarantee document bearing Chairwoman Caldwell's name has been flagged as potentially non-authentic. A handwriting review has been completed. Alistair's voice was quiet now. This is not what it looks like. Wynne, seated behind Senna as legal support, said without inflection, "That phrase appears often in rooms like this." Gage opened his folder. "The bank and this borrower have a long relationship, surely a cure period." "That depends," Claret said, "on whether the documentation was submitted in good faith." Vance turned to the expense exhibit. On the screen, itemized charges run through Merit Elevation accounts. An apartment lease coded as Client Hospitality Suite. Designer wardrobe coded as Brand Campaign Samples. Spa services coded as Executive Wellness. Private travel coded as Regional Market Development. Jewelry coded as Investor Relations Gifts. Roxanne looked at the screen for a long time. Then she looked at the table. "Those were approved through the business," she said. Wynne said, without expression, "Approved by whom?" Roxanne looked towards Gage. That look was the last thing her loyalty did for Alistair Merritt. Osmond put his hand flat on the table. "I want to cooperate," he said, "with the full review." Helene's head turned slowly. "Don't." Osmond looked at Senna instead. "I'm choosing which side of the record I'm on." Helene's voice dropped to a register that had frightened people for 40 years. "You are embarrassing this family." "No," Osmond said quietly. "I'm choosing not to go down with it." Alistair looked at Senna. His voice had changed, less certain now, the practiced confidence finally finding its edge. "Senna, this was our life. Don't do this in front of strangers." She finally looked at him directly. "You filed our divorce in front of an audience," she said. "You handed me my bag in front of your mother and your girlfriend and your house staff. You did not ask whether that was the right room for that kind of news." She paused. "Neither did I." Alistair looked away first. Helene straightened in her chair. "You hid what you owned. You deceived this family from the beginning." Senna turned to her. "I disclosed every relevant trust in the premarital agreement. Your son signed it without reading past the first page. He was proud of that. She let the words settle. I spent 11 years deciding whether to tell him the truth. Every time I came close, he showed me exactly why my father told me to wait. Helene had no answer. For perhaps the first time in the 11 years Senna had known her, Helene Merritt had no answer. Claret read the committee's recommendation. Harwick would freeze all discretionary credit access pending the completed review. Emergency refinancing was declined. The questioned spousal document was referred for legal review. Defaulted obligations would be formally noticed. Estate-backed collateral would be placed under recovery evaluation. Alistair's voice went thin. If you freeze the credit line, the company can't. Then it was already there, Senna said. Claret placed the conflict disclosure form in front of Senna. Senna picked up her father's pen and read the document the way he had taught her to read every document, line by line, no rushing, skipping, no trusting that someone else had done it for her. Then she signed. Alistair watched her hand. You're destroying what I built, he said. Senna set the pen down. You built it on ground I was quietly holding. When I stopped holding it, it fell. She looked at him. That was not destruction. That was the truth about what was always there. The company did not survive the month. Payroll failed 48 hours after the credit freeze. Vendors stopped deliveries. A second lender issued a cross-default notice when Harwick's review became public record. Investors demanded answers. Alistair's personal guarantees were examined and found to cover more than he had represented. Within 3 weeks, Merit Elevation Group filed for bankruptcy protection. Roxanne received subpoenas before she finished packing the apartment the company had paid for. The lease, the wardrobe, the travel, the silk scarf, all of it was documented in Harwick's expense review. A court notice required her to return company-funded property. She returned the scarf in a padded envelope to Harwick's legal department, addressed to no one in particular. It was logged as recovered property and placed in a file box. It was not a crown anymore. It was just evidence. Helene's control over the Aldenmore residential trust was suspended pending review of her role in the guarantee documentation. A court-appointed administrator posted notice on the front door of a house she had believed would always obey her. She stood at the bottom of the staircase and looked at the walls as if they owed her something. Orson was in the hallway when she reached the bottom step. He did not look away. He did not speak. He only stood with his hands at his sides, the way he had stood for 30 years in that house, watching the people who claimed to own it do what they did. Senna did not celebrate. When Wynne called to confirm the bankruptcy filing, Senna was at Harwick reviewing the employee impact report from Merit Elevation, the names of receptionists and project managers and site coordinators who had done nothing wrong and would now face the consequences of decisions made far above them. She worked with Harwick's lawful recovery channels and a separate arm of the Caldwell Beacon Foundation to establish a transition fund for affected workers, severance support, placement assistance, emergency household grants, no press release, no speeches, no cameras. It was the first thing she had done in weeks that felt uncomplicated. She returned to Aldenmore once, not to reclaim it, not to stand in any particular doorway with any particular expression. She came because the court administrator needed her acknowledgement on a records transfer, related to estate-backed accounts Harwick was processing. The front hallway looked the same and felt entirely different, the way places do when the people who gave them meaning are gone. Maud met her near the door. She started to say Mrs. Merritt, then stopped herself. Miss Caldwell, she said. Senna smiled. Senna is fine. Orson stood near the entry table, the same table where the settlement papers had been placed, the same place Helene had held out her hand for the keys. Most of the staff stayed until the end, he said, because of the way you helped them leave with something. Senna looked around the hallway. She had spent 11 years making a house kinder than the people who owned it. She had believed that was love. She understood now that it was something else. A habit of protection she had confused for intimacy because it was the closest thing she had been given to it. She walked to the foot of the staircase. She did not go up. She only stood there for a moment with her hand on the newel post and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened in this hall. The envelope, the keys, the scarf, the one bag, the cold air when the door opened. Then she let go of the post and walked out without explaining herself to the house. Months later, after the divorce was finalized and the asset division settled and the legal referrals filed, Senna returned to Harwick Capital after closing. The building was quiet the way buildings are when the workday has ended and only the important things remain. She went to the boardroom, She set her father's pen on the table and sat in the chair at the head of it. Not the chair Roxanne had taken at Aldenmore, not the chair Helene had moved to a corner, not the chair Alistair had assumed was empty because she was sitting in it without making noise. This chair had her name on it. Not the married one, the real one. Senna Caldwell. Claret knocked twice and opened the door. The final recovery approvals came through, she said. Senna nodded. Are you all right? Senna looked through the boardroom glass at the city outside, lights beginning to appear in windows, people moving below the way they always did, ordinary and unhurried, and completely unaware that somewhere above them, in a quiet room, a woman was figuring out what to call the feeling of being exactly where she was always supposed to be. I'm becoming all right, she said. Claret nodded once and left her alone. Senna picked up her father's pen. She turned it in her fingers the way she had when she was 22 and did not yet understand what he was teaching her. She understood it now, not just the lesson about signatures, but the one beneath it, the one about knowing your own name well enough to recognize when someone else is using it carelessly. She set the pen back on the table. She turned off the light. She walked out of the boardroom without looking back, because there are women who discover their power after betrayal, and there are women who carry it quietly for years, and the only difference between them is whether anyone was paying attention. Alistair Merritt had not been paying attention. That was never her failure. That was only finally his.